Chapter 24. The next morning, Devon managed to leave without rousing me. I was usually somewhat aware he was leaving, but not that day. Upon waking, I reached for him and found the bed empty, putting me in a foul mood. I spent half the morning lying in bed reading, working my way through the books Bill had sent me. I felt a little less grumpy when, at 10:50 a.m., I laid my PCD aside and went in search of food. My stomach grumbled as I pulled on some clothes and shuffled into the kitchen. Gavin sat at the dining table, in his usual spot. He watched me make my way into the room. "Are you all right?" He sounded concerned. "I'm fine," I scowled. "I've been reading." "Is there anything I can do for you?" "Just leave me alone for now, I'm cranky. I'm being unreasonable and I know it, but I just want to be left alone." "All right, I'll let you be. I'll be here if you change your mind." I pulled leftovers out of the fridge and warmed them up before taking them back to my bedroom. I wasn't sure why I was so cranky, but everything, every word, every move rubbed me wrong for some reason. I read for several more hours, stopping only when my neck and back were too stiff to continue. I showered and dressed, hoping it would make me feel better. It did, but not as much as I'd hoped. Glancing at the clock, I realized that Devon would be home soon, and I headed for the kitchen, deciding I needed to do something. Fixing dinner might be just that something. I'd pulled all my ingredients out and was working on the prep work for enchiladas, with Gavin still sitting at the table, when we heard two vehicles pull into the yard. Gavin stood. "I'll see who it is." I let him. I was working on losing myself in my cooking, and I didn't want to be bothered. Besides, security was his job. "It's Devon and the Aniquitos." Gavin called from the other room. "I'll go out and meet them if you don't mind." "Go ahead, I'm fine." I called back, continuing with my cooking. I vaguely registered the front door opening and the men talking in the front room as I grated cheese. Several minutes later, I went looking for my enchilada pan. I found it on the top shelf of an upper cabinet. Brittany had to have put it there. She was the only one tall enough to reach that high. Without thinking, I grabbed a dining room chair, dragged it over to the counter and stepped up on it. I had just plucked the large glass pan off the shelf when Devon stepped into the kitchen, Bill right behind him. Devon rushed to my side. He took the pan from me with one hand, setting it on the counter as he wrapped his other arm around my legs, as to keep me from falling. "What are you doing up there?" He frowned. "Getting down the pan for dinner," I said, stating the obvious. "Why didn't you call me to get it for you?" "Because you were busy and I could do it." "You shouldn't be climbing like that." "Why not?" The temper I'd been holding on to all day started slipping from my control. It's not like I stood on a chair with wheels or a folding chair. It is a perfectly stable place to stand. What if you fell? Am I suddenly clumsy? Too much of a hazard to myself to do even the most basic things on my own? I knew I was making too much of this, but I couldn't stop. It was more than I could take, and I couldn't hold it inside anymore. "No, but what?" I demanded. "He's just trying to protect you, dear," Bill said from where he stood near the doorway. Gavin beside him. "Protect me from what?" "Myself?" I snapped. "From anything that might hurt you." Bill's voice was calm. "I'm sick of being coddled and protected. I can't do anything without a shadow. I can't even pee without someone asking if I'm all right." Gavin's face flushed. I don't know if he felt guilty or it was because I'd been crude. In that moment, I didn't care. Devon seemed to be at a loss for words. I didn't blame him. If he'd ever seen me this angry before, it had been when I was a kid. I knew I was being childish, but I couldn't help it. I couldn't stop the words from coming out of my mouth any more than I could stop myself from feeling the emotions that had brought them on. "I haven't fought the bodyguard." I understand why I should have one, I do. After what happened in Seattle and what almost happened in Sweetwater, I fully appreciate the danger. I won't deny that. However, for the last month, everything that might take lifting, climbing, or even a little physical effort has been done for me. I'm pregnant, not dying or half dead. I can do things for myself. By the time I finished, I was screaming. We just want to keep you safe, Bill said. You. I turned to address him. You are as guilty as he is. Talking me into quitting my job so that you can keep me safe from all the scary things. Why does no one think I can't run my own life? Gavin's movement drew my eyes to him. His face was red and he was trying to push past Bill, but an arm had reached out of the hall and held him back. Who else is here? I all but snarled. It's me, Chickie. Terry's voice came from around the corner. Why are you hiding over there? I'm not hiding, I just hadn't made it into the room yet when you tore into everyone. His voice was calm and reasonable. Why the death grip on Gavin? Because he doesn't like the way you're talking to the Aniquitos. He's ready to jump in and put a stop to it. I'm not talking to the Aniquitos, I'm talking to Bill. I know that, Chickie, but Gavin doesn't realize there's a difference. There is no difference, she's disrespecting our leader. Gavin still struggled against Terry's arm. Terry's voice stayed calm. Would you get between the Aniquitos and Jake or Mackenzie? Everyone in the room knew that Jake and Mackenzie are Bill's children. Gavin stopped fighting Terry's grip and turned to look at him. Well, no, that would be a family problem. So is this. There may not be blood between them, but Nicki is another one of his kids, always has been. Gavin blinked and turned to look at the three of us with new eyes. The confrontation between Terry and Gavin had given me time to calm some. I looked down at the three men, the three who were the guiltiest, and realized I was still standing on the chair. I put my hands on Devon's shoulders for a climb down and put the chair away. I didn't realize you felt that way. Devon looked at me as if the men behind him hadn't spoken. I didn't really either, until it all came tumbling out. Tears starting to trail down my face. He wrapped his arms around me. What's wrong, baby? His voice filled with concern. Nothing, I just can't stop it. I wiped my face, not sure why I was crying. I let him hold me, his warmth and scent were comforting, but the caring he showed after the way I'd just treated him made me feel guilty, and the silent tears soon became sobs. Devon sat in the chair I'd been standing on and pulled me onto his lap. He held me tight while I cried. Are you sure you're all right? Panic rose in his voice. Just let her get it out, I heard Bill say. I don't know how long I sat there crying, but by the time I was done, I felt emotionally drained. I scrubbed my hands on my face and pushed away from Devon, standing. Are you sure you're okay? Devon seemed reluctant to let me go. I could only nod. She probably feels a lot better now, Bill said, drawing my attention back to him. He was still standing in the doorway, Gavin behind him. Bill looked normal, calm, composed, but the look on Gavin's face was what surprised me. His face was red and his mouth hung open, as if he couldn't believe what he'd seen. Sit down, I said. I feel like a freak with you standing there staring at me. What do you mean? Devon asked. Bill pulled a chair away from the table, turned it and sat sideways to the table so he was facing us. Karen got the same way sometimes when she was pregnant. It's the hormones. Think of it as kind of pressure valve. Consider everything that's happened recently. If you add into it the huge amount of stress she's been under, it's a wonder she didn't explode earlier. He stayed calm and accepting the whole time. But she yelled at you, sir. She screamed at you. Gavin finally found his voice. Bill shrugged. Families do that sometimes. But Gavin sputtered. Bill pinned him with a look that said drop it, and reluctantly he did. Terry, you might as well come on in too, Devon said, keeping an eye on me. I was silent as I slipped out of the room. I went in the bathroom and washed my face. Bill was right, I did feel a lot better, but now I had to face them all. To hell with it. I wasn't some fainting miss to hide from a little embarrassment. I'd done it, I'd faced the fallout. I lifted my head and went back into the kitchen. I went to Devon and kissed his cheek. Thank you. I turned to look at all four of them seated at the table, waiting to make sure I really was all right. I'm fine, really. I turned back to the meal I'd been working on. What's up? Caden is on his way. He's going to fill us in on what Jessup had to say and decide where to go from there, Bill said. I nodded and kept working. The men visited and talked behind me. I didn't pay close attention to what they were saying. Instead, I let the familiar voices wash over me, relaxing me with the knowledge that I was surrounded with people I cared for and trusted. I slid the casserole dish into the oven and set the timer before moving to stand beside Devon. He wrapped one arm around my hips and pulled me against him. I stood there a moment before he pulled me into his lap, holding me close while he continued to talk to the others. After several minutes, we heard a vehicle pull in the driveway. I suspected it was Caden. Gavin went to check. It's him, he called from the front room. Why don't we all go in the living room? I suggested. There's more room and we'll be more comfortable there. We filed into the living room. Devon let the others take the couches and pulled me down into his lap in the recliner. I didn't argue. It felt too good not to let him hold me. Gavin let Caden in and they both sat. Well? Bill asked once everyone was comfortable. What do you want first? What he had to say or what we think? Caden asked. What he said, Devon said. Caden nodded. He said he was up the mountain on a campout. With someone? I asked. Terry grinned. You're catching on. No. He was alone, running and communing with nature. So, no alibi, Bill concluded. No, nothing that can be verified, Caden confirmed. What else did he say? Devon wanted to know. He was very careful about what he did and didn't say. When we asked if he knew her, he said he'd never actually met her. Terry said. Bill lifted one brow. When I asked how well he knew Anderson and Garza, he said they hung out some. Caden said. Tell me what you think, Bill said. I think he was too careful. He skirted the questions, answering them, but not giving us what we were looking for. Terry said. Caden nodded. I agree. He was definitely hiding something. If he isn't one of the killers, he knows who they are. We need to talk to them all again. Bill turned to Devon. I could have them come see me, but I think it would be better if they see us both together. I'll have them come in, one at a time of course, and we can question them. We'll see what they have to say to us, if they'll dare to lie to our faces. After that, if we determine they're the killers, we'll have to decide how to deal with them. You decide. I'll see that it gets done, Devon said with no reservation. Outwardly he was calm, but I knew he wasn't as composed as he appeared because his thumb was playing up and down the skin of my arm. The familiar motion was something he did when he was upset, or I was. It was a tactile reminder that the other was there, and we both found it comforting. I knew that once they figured out who the murderers were, there would be some kind of serious punishment. The hard part was to keep from attracting suspicion from the police. Even though Annie's murder was over 2 months ago, it was still in the news and on people's minds. 3 men suddenly disappearing would be noticed, unless there were plausible explanations for each of them. The timer I'd set went off, and I went to check on dinner. Lost in thought about what kind of punishment Bill might order and how to explain them, I didn't realize that the men were headed outside until I heard the front door close. I pulled the hot pan out of the oven and set it on the stove to rest, then went in the living room to see who was staying for dinner. Through the large window, I saw Devon headed inside and 3 vehicles headed down the driveway. I guess it would just be the 2 of us. I could live with that. Friday morning, I was surprised to find Devon lying beside me when I woke. My first thought was panic that the alarm hadn't gone off, and I shook him. "Wake up, you're late, your alarm didn't go off." He rolled onto his side and curled around me. "The alarm wasn't set." "You're late." "I took today off." "What?" I frowned, confused. "I took today off." He repeated. "What? Why?" "So I could spend some time with you." He kissed my neck. "But what about Dad?" "I talked to him last night, he said it was okay." Relieved, I relaxed against him and let myself enjoy his attentions. Later, after we had gotten out of bed and showered, we sat at the kitchen table eating. "What else do you have in mind for today?" "I thought we could go for a ride, then a run." "Bike or truck?" I was intrigued by the idea. "I was thinking bike, but if you'd rather the truck, we can do that too." "No, it's a nice day, let's take the bike. It will be too cold to take it out before long, and by the time it warms back up, I'll be too big to ride." "All right." He ate for a few minutes before looking up again. "You up for a long ride or you just want to make it a short one?" "A long ride sounds great." "After breakfast you can change clothes, I'll get things ready to go." I hurried to finish my meal. After changing into jeans and boots, I grabbed the riding jackets from the front closet and headed out to the carport. Devon was sitting on his heels beside the bike. He finished buckling the saddlebags closed, stood up and turned to me. "You ready?" "As ever." He started the bike, I climbed on behind him and we pulled out of the driveway. I hadn't asked where we were going, and I didn't really care. I loved the feel of the bike rumbling beneath me, the wind in my face, and right now, that was enough. I was only peripherally aware that we were headed east out of town until we turned onto Highway 191. It was the same road we'd taken back from his grandmother's a week earlier. We rode the entire stretch of road without stopping or even slowing until we reached the intersection at 3-way. He pulled up and stopped in front of the sign at the intersection. "You want to stop and get anything?" He sent over our mental connection. "No, I'm good." I thought back. "All right." He waited until traffic cleared, then cranked the handle on the bike, sending us flying across the empty road and onto Highway 78. We passed the large, dilapidated movie screen and continued up the road. The mesquite and creosote-filled desert blended into hills covered in scrub oak as we climbed in elevation. The road was a narrow asphalt ribbon weaving around large boulders, down into canyons and back up again. We'd been on the bike nearly 2 hours when Devon pulled off onto one of many wide spots in the road. It wasn't a rest area or anywhere designed for it, just a wide area with an area of cleared dirt where people often parked for a while for different reasons. The one he'd chosen was surrounded by thick greenery. I could see a break in the distance, but it was a good-sized patch of trees and underbrush. "How's this look?" He used our mental connection, as the helmets and the still-running bike would have made hearing him talk difficult. "It looks like a good place to run." I sent back. "We need to hide the bike." He cut the engine. I swung my leg over the back of the bike, before taking off my helmet. Devon dismounted and pulled off his own, shaking his hair until it fell and brushed his shoulders. "I need to get this shit cut." "I like it." He looked at me. "Really? Really?" "It's a pain in the ass." "Sometimes, yes." "Here." I moved behind him and used my fingers to comb it back into a small ponytail at the nape of his neck, securing it with a hair tie I'd been wearing on my wrist. Better? Yeah, thanks. I guess I'm either going to have to start carrying those, or cut it. I'll make you a deal. I trailed off, waiting for him to respond. What? You cut your hair and I'll cut mine. But you have such beautiful hair, why would you want to cut it? Because you did. I don't get it. It's not that I want to cut my hair, it's that I don't want you to cut yours. I like yours, it's soft and sleek and it looks good on you. So you would cut yours just out of spite if I cut mine? I was quiet for a second, considering the way he'd phrased it. Yeah, pretty much. If that's what it takes to keep you from cutting yours. He grinned suddenly. You're cutthroat. I couldn't help it, I stuck my tongue out at him. Turning away, I looked at the brush surrounding us. I spotted a trail heading away from the clearing and headed for it, pushing my way inside. After several steps, I turned back. We can bring the bike back here. It will be out of sight and should be safe. We pushed the motorcycle several feet down the path until we were sure it wouldn't be spotted by someone passing by on the road. Then I hung my helmet on the handlebars. It had become a habit. I looked around one more time before I started to take off my clothes. I folded each piece as I took it off and piled it all on the seat of the bike. Devon pulled a small bag out of the saddlebag on the far side. Here, put them in this. I tucked my clothes inside and then gave it back so he could use it for his. Instead of shifting, I stood and watched him strip, enjoying the show. I liked what I saw so much, I didn't really pay any attention to the temperature until I started shivering. Devon noticed. Why haven't you shifted? I got distracted. By what? Watching you. Shift. Get warm. All right. I bent, putting one knee on the ground while the other stayed bent in front of me. Curling my back, I laid both hands on the ground and concentrated. I pictured my wolf form in my head. I knew her well. I'd seen her many times in the mirror at home. She was a large wolf with fur the same color as my hair, a rich deep auburn. Once I had her image in mind, I focused on becoming her, willing myself into that form. I felt the familiar tingling sensation of the shift spread over my skin. My muscles and bones stretched and popped as they took their new form, and the tingling faded. I knew the entire process took less than a minute, but sometimes it seemed longer. Once the shift was complete, I stood and shook my whole body, thankful for the fur that now covered me and kept me warm. I looked around, knowing Devon couldn't be far, yet I didn't see him. Devon? I sent. Right here. I heard his mental voice at the same time he appeared around the front of the bike. I knew you had to be close, but I didn't see you. I was just shifting, I wouldn't leave you alone. I know. I nudged him with my shoulder. Come on, let's go. I started at a trot, moving deeper into the brush, along the trail at first, but soon following an intriguing scent off to one side. I pushed through the brush, barely noticing as twigs and leaves tugged at my fur. What did you find? Devon followed me. I don't know. I've never smelled it before. He was quiet for a moment. I don't recognize it either. In that moment it dawned on me, I probably had more experience with scents than he did, at least out here like this. I'm sure there were some scents he would recognize before I did. It's kind of cat-like, but it's not like any cat I've been around. We followed the scent for several minutes, deeper into the brush and trees. I didn't really pay a whole lot of attention to where we were going. I could always follow our scent back. The trail was getting stronger and I knew we were getting closer to whatever had left the smell. I moved a little faster, eager to find out what it was. I stopped in my tracks at the sound of a low clicking growl coming from somewhere above me. Shit! Devon's voice in my head almost made me jump. Back away slowly. No sudden moves. I started inching backwards, not wanting to move too quickly. What is it? A loud scream cut through the air and I knew. We'd inadvertently been trailing a cougar, and now that cougar was pissed. I could only hope that if we backed away and left it alone, it wouldn't come after us. I took a deep breath and tried to make my fur stand on end, to make myself look bigger. If I'd been in my human form, I would have stood tall and held open the sides of my jacket to make myself look larger. My heart thundered in my chest as I carefully looked up, wanting to catch a glimpse of the animal before I was too far away. I met its eyes and it screamed again. It took everything in me not to turn and run. I continued to back away, keeping my movements slow. Devon had waited for me until we were side by side, then he moved with me. We backed away, keeping our eyes on the cat until we could no longer see it. We backed farther, watching in case it was following. Are we clear? I think so. Together, we turned and took off running in the direction we'd come. That was close. Even I could hear the relief in my mental voice. Wasn't it? Now we know what the scent was, and I won't be following it again. Me either. I don't want to do that again anytime soon. Or ever. Now that the cougar was behind us, and I felt safe again, I couldn't help but send a laugh over our mental channel. What? Have you lost your taste for the adrenaline? No. I still like the rush from the adrenaline, but I have no taste for the terror I felt when I realized it was a cougar, and you were between it and me. If it had attacked, there was no way I could get between the two of you in time. We're predators, but a cougar is larger and has claws that we don't have. I like the adrenaline, but I don't like the fear of losing you. I was humbled. I'd been teasing, but his words made the humor fade. I'm sorry, babe. I turned to face him and licked his muzzle. It was the best I could do in this form. It's not your fault. I was curious too. But I was making fun of it. That's just who you are. It's not a problem. He rubbed his face against my neck, comforting me in return. You want to run some more or head back to the bike? Bike, I think I've run enough for today. I don't want to risk staying in his territory too long. I was referring to the cougar. I didn't know how he might react if he thought we were hanging around in his space. It just seemed like a better idea to leave. I agree. We followed the trail of our own scents and soon made it back to where we'd parked the bike. Not seeing a reason to wait, I shifted and reached for the bag where we'd stashed our clothes. Do you want to head home or make the big loop? Devon asked as soon as he was in human form. The big loop? Glenwood Luna Alpine Morenci home. He clarified. Do we have time for that? Do you have somewhere you have to be today? I took the day off. I have no plans. How long will it take? From here? Another 4 hours or so if we don't stop. I thought for just a second. Why not? My stomach grumbled. You didn't happen to bring anything to eat, did you? He grinned and dug into the saddlebag on his side of the bike from me. He pulled out a meal replacement shake and handed me the small can. Start with that. He continued digging, pulling out a couple more shakes, a plastic container and a canteen. I shook the can for several seconds before popping it open and draining it in one long swallow. Trash. There's a bag in the duffel we had our clothes in. I dug out the bag and dropped my empty can inside before hanging it on the rear of the bike. Before I could ask for another shake, he opened the container and gave me several pieces of jerky. Here, stick a few in your jacket pocket. You can let them soften in your mouth while we ride. It's easier to chew them that way. I tore a chunk off with my teeth and shoved the rest in my pocket. After gnawing through the piece of dried meat, I picked up one of the remaining shakes and took a long drink. What's in the canteen? Water. He held it out to me. I took it and tipped it back, restoring the moisture that the jerky had pulled from my mouth. After a few swallows, I gave it back. Devon ate his own jerky before consuming the last shake. He took a gulp from the canteen and offered it to me again. I'm good. He nodded and, making sure the bottle was sealed, put it, the jerky bowl, and the bag of trash back in the saddlebag. You ready? Yep. Let's back this thing out of here and we'll get started. Devon climbed on the bike and walked it back off the path. Once he had it on the open ground of the pullout, he kicked the engine over. I climbed on behind him and we took off. We rode through the mountains, enjoying the sensation of the wind in my face, my hair flipping in the wind where it hung below my helmet. I loved the array of scents. I recognized the oak and juniper trees, the tang of tar rising from the highway under the midday sun. Somewhere in the mountains, we crossed the state line into New Mexico. Then the mountains leveled out into grassy fields. The meadows were brown from the weather, but I could see a small herd of antelope milling near the tree line on the south side of the highway. I watched them, and it occurred to me that they likely heard engines often enough that the sound didn't frighten them. I thought it was likely that whoever owned the land probably didn't allow hunting, or the animals wouldn't be so at home. The meadow was gone in a moment, replaced by a stand of trees, then another large sweeping meadow. The road continued for several miles in the same manner, until Highway 78 ended in an intersection with Highway 180. The highway was empty as Devon maneuvered the bike with ease, and we turned left onto the new road and headed north. We rode in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. The trees closed in on both sides of the highway, and as we climbed in elevation, the greenery around us changed, from juniper and oak to pine and aspen. Different scents filled the air as well. We slowed a few times as we encountered tight curves or passed through a community, but we didn't talk or stop for a couple of hours. You getting hungry again? Devon's voice echoed through my mind, startling me. Yeah, actually, I am. Do you want to stop and eat? Eat what? There's a cafe in Alpine. I thought we could stop there. A cafe sounds good. How long until we get there? Another half hour or so. Sounds good. I let my eyes skate over my surroundings while the bike continued to thunder beneath us. 30 minutes later, I felt the bike slow as we approached the small town. You know, I sent to Devon as the buildings of the town started to surround us. I haven't been up here in years. Me either. There was an edge of laughter in his tone. I snaked one hand under his jacket to pinch him, letting him know I was onto him. I know you haven't been up here since before you joined the army. How long has it actually been? About that long. I came up with some friends before I took off that summer. It's been longer than that for me, probably another 2 or 3 years. We only made the trip a few times. Devon slowed the bike to a stop, waiting for traffic to clear so he could turn into the parking lot of the small cafe. Just like I remember, not much has changed, Devon said, looking at the dark shingle siding on the old building. I don't remember it. It could be because we never stopped, or simply because I was so young. I held my helmet in one hand and lifted it in question, asking without words what to do with it. We'll take them in with us. He wrapped one arm around my waist, his own helmet in his other hand, and together we headed for the door. The interior was dim after the bright sun outside, and it took my eyes a moment to adjust. Seat yourselves. I'll be with you in a moment, a waitress said on her way by, her hands filled with plates. The inside of the cafe was worn but clean. The booths on one wall had cracked vinyl seats, the wood tops of the tables worn shiny with age and repeated use. Devon led me to a nearby booth, and while I sat, he put both helmets on the other bench before taking a seat beside me. The waitress, a slender woman in her mid-50s with graying brown hair, appeared a moment later. Here's our menu. She handed us each a folded page of laminated paper. And some water. Is there anything else you'd like to drink? I smiled up at her. Just water for me. Water's good, Devon said. Then I'll give you a few minutes. She left us alone. We placed our orders, and I took a better look around the small restaurant while we waited for our food. It had a rustic decor, exposed wooden beams supporting the ceiling, walls made of logs. There were old photographs and antlers adorning the walls, showing some of the history of the town. The floor was clean but worn, red and tan checkerboard tile. I spent several minutes looking around, taking in the restaurant before I became aware that Devon sat right beside me, watching me with as much attention as I was giving our surroundings. What? I asked, self-conscious. Nothing, I was just watching you. My face heated. Why? Because I can't get enough of you, and sometimes I can't believe how lucky I've been in the last few months. He picked up my hand from the table and kissed the back of it. It's more than I ever dared to think about having. My eyes misted over and I felt the tears pool, threatening to spill down my cheeks. 6 months ago, if someone had told me that before the end of the year I would be married, with a baby on the way, not to mention the rest of it, I would have said they were on drugs. But now, I wouldn't have it any other way. I leaned over and laid my head against his shoulder, inhaling his scent mixed with the leather of his jacket. I'm glad you brought me out today, I needed it. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I thought we could both use a chance to get away, and I like spending time with you. He whispered as if it were a secret. The waitress brought our meals and refilled our water before leaving us alone again. We were silent for a few minutes while we ate. I have a doctor's appointment on Monday. I broke the silence. Is everything okay? He looked at me, concerned. It's fine, my appointment is with the OB. He scowled, not saying anything. It's for the baby, I explained. I'm sure there will be blood work and I don't know what else. Do you want me to go? I was quiet a moment, looking for the right words. I don't need you to go, however, I don't want you to not go either. I thought for a moment longer. I'd like to have you there, but I don't expect it. He looked at me again, uncertain. I'd tried again. I'd like for you to be there if you want to be there, but I don't need you to go. If you don't want to go with me, that's fine too. He thought about it for a minute, maybe more. I'd like to go. I need to know what time so I can let your dad know. I've already made arrangements with Bill for the appointment. Your first day, how's that going to go over? I scheduled it a couple of weeks ago. It was the first appointment I could get. You hadn't mentioned it. You've been busy trying to find Annie's killer, and with the hunt for Brandon, I didn't want to add to your stress. You are not a stress. He used a napkin to clean his hands and face before leaning over and kissing my cheek. Keeping you and that little one safe are the reason I haven't fought the whole Theron thing. It wasn't a position I really wanted, though. I might have eventually. I don't know. But I'll do anything to keep you safe and happy. I couldn't help but smile. We finished eating and Devon paid the tab while I visited the restroom, then I met him where he waited for me at the door. We got back on the bike and headed out. We were still a good 3 hours from home, if not more. In Alpine we turned onto Highway 191. Half the people my parents' ages called it the 666 highway, and I've heard that it used to actually be the highway number, but it hadn't been in my lifetime. Local rumor says that they changed the number because of the number of deaths along the highway. It had gained the reputation across the country as the Devil's Highway. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's what I've always heard. I do know that this is the only road that's ever made me car sick. I have to keep an eye on the road and what's going on or I get nauseous. I didn't think I'd have much trouble with that on the bike. Heading down the mountain, I kept my arms around Devon's middle so that I could take cues from him to lean into the many curves, and I wouldn't have to pay as much attention to the road. I wanted to be able to enjoy what I knew was going to be some spectacular views. I let Devon worry about driving, and I let my eyes roam the green landscape and nearly rhythmic tempo of the twists and curves. Following Devon's lead, I leaned to one side and then the other as the road wound its way down one of the curviest roads in the United States. Maybe an hour after we left Alpine, my stomach started acting up. "Can we pull off for a bit?" "Sure, I'll find us a spot." He steered the bike off the road at the next pull-out. "You all right?" He killed the engine. "I'm fine, just a little nauseous." I climbed off the bike and pulled my helmet off. I turned and walked the short distance to the edge where the cut for the road ended in a steep drop-off. Behind me, I heard Devon prop the bike on the kickstand. "The stop will do us good anyway. It will let the brakes cool, keep them from overheating." I heard him, but didn't pull my attention from the tree-covered mountains across the deep cut in front of me. Gravel crunched behind as he approached. "You really all right?" I turned and looked at him. Nothing that a few minutes of being still won't cure. I couldn't help smiling up at him, touched by his concern. "Are you enjoying the ride?" "Yeah." He looked away to take in the view. "I haven't had time to ride like this since just after I got home, and I haven't felt up to doing it since before the accident." He was referring to the fall he'd taken while in the army more than a year before. I was sure that a shattered femur and all the rehab it had taken just to get him walking again, and with a limp at that, would have made riding long distances like today very uncomfortable. We walked back and forth over the length of the pullout several times, stretching our legs while my stomach settled and the brakes cooled, then climbed back on the bike and resumed the trip down the mountain. We stopped twice more before we got to the edge of the mine that supported the community of Morenci, as well as providing employment for much of Duncan and Safford. "It's grown a lot." Devon spoke into my mind. "It has, even since the last time I was here." "When was that?" "Oh, probably 3 or 4 years at least, I'm not sure." "Don't make the trip often?" "I haven't had a reason to. You know how it is." "Yeah, I do." Instead of driving straight through town, Devon turned the bike to drive into some of the residential areas. Down through the terraced housing, to the bottom of the hole where the schools sat. "You ever play here?" "Some, we came a few times a year for tennis matches." I played against the football team. The thing I remember most was the fireworks they set off for a touchdown. Unlike a lot of places, they didn't just set them off for the home team. They would set off fireworks for every touchdown, no matter who made it. It made me look forward to games here. I remember that. Cam played, and we went to as many of his games as we could make. We headed up a hill that had seemed much steeper as a child than it did now, ending on a hilltop covered with more houses. Devon easily found the route back to the highway, and we were soon on the road home. We pulled into our driveway as the sun set. As much as I had enjoyed the day and the ride, I was glad to be home. I wasn't used to sitting on a bike so long, and my legs were stiff as I climbed off and headed inside. "Wait," Devon called before I got the door open. I turned to look at him. "What?" "Let me go first, make sure no one's been here." I thought it was unnecessary, but I waited, letting him go inside first and check the place out. "Is it safe now?" I followed him into the house, walking carefully because I was stiff from being on the bike. He came back into the kitchen after checking the rest of the house and bent to kiss my nose. "It is. How you feeling?" He looked down at my crooked legs. "A little stiff, I'm not used to sitting so long on a bike." "Why don't you go rest for a bit?" "No, it will only get worse. Besides, I'm hungry again and I need to make dinner." "I'll make dinner, go take a warm bath, soak those muscles or you'll be sore tomorrow." "I'll probably be sore tomorrow either way." "Soaking them now will make you less sore," he said. I sighed. "Are you sure you don't mind making dinner?" "I'm sure." He kissed the top of my head and, with his hands on my shoulders, steered me toward the hallway leading to the bedroom. Now go. He sent me off with a playful smack on the butt. I got out of the tub feeling much better than when I'd gotten in. A lot of the stiffness in my thighs had eased. I pulled on a pair of old sweatpants and one of Devon's t-shirts and followed the smell of food into the kitchen. Smells good. I went to the cabinet to get a glass for tea. We have another 10 or 15 minutes before it's ready. All right. I filled my glass and sat at the dining table, watching him move around the room as he finished preparing our meal. Before long, we sat together enjoying plates of spaghetti. I couldn't help but watch him as I ate, looking forward to spending the rest of my life with him.